Tonight, we're here with Countercurrents Radio, and Greg is away this week, so he asked me to host the stream for him. So, tonight we have four guys on the stream, and what we're going to be talking about is the Iranian war, the war that the United States and Israel have started against Iran. We're going to talk about some of the political implications of this. We have four guys on the stream. We have myself. There's Wilhem Ivorsson. How's it going, Wilhem?
It's going pretty good. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Good to have you. We have Frodi. How you doing, Frodi?
Good evening. I'm doing okay. I'm doing fine. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. And we have Morgoth, my usual partner on the classic movie streams we do every month. How's it going, Morgoth?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for inviting me on.
No problem. All right, so I will get into it. So what I'll do first is I'll give my kind of quick take on the war. We'll go through several different aspects of the whole conflict, and because there's a lot to talk about, both what's going on around the world, what's going on in the White House, and the political implications. But I'll give kind of my first take on what this means for America and the world, and America as a global superpower. Then I'll go around with the other guys and let them give their takes as well. So my initial take on everything which is going on is that it seems like this war could be to America as a global superpower what the Suez Crisis was for the British Empire and the French Empire, that being the nail in the coffin. So you can see a lot of parallels between the Suez Crisis in 1956 and the war in Iran right now. It's these waning powers attacking a Middle Eastern country. Israel was involved. It resulted in trade routes being disrupted. So that being the Suez Canal in 1956, and today that being the Strait of Hormuz. But there were also some pretty big differences. Like one of them, for example, the British and French militaries actually performed quite well during the Suez Crisis. And it could be said that they were acting in their own interests, whereas it seems like America's war is just purely in the interests of Israel. But I kind of get the vibes from this. It's almost as if like America as the global superpower is kind of, it's kind of stepped into this kind of bear trap where they're going to just lose a huge amount of prestige by getting themselves bogged down in this haphazard, badly planned out war. And I think that this might end up developing in a similar way. So I'll go over to Frodi first. So what are your thoughts on what this war means for America and the world in general?
Well, first of all, I should say that since we stopped doing the weekly roundup, I haven't been following the daily news as diligently as I was before, because I don't have to, because I don't talk about the news in public all the time. But I think it's clear that this is in a very similar way as the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The American-Israeli attack on Iran is something that was supposed to be a show of strength, but turned out to be sort of the opposite. And of course, initially, it was very brutal, and the Americans show a lot of power, but it's also an exercise in sort of self-humiliation. Trump has been embarrassing himself by contradicting himself in almost several times in every speech he's given, or in every sort of press conference he's given. He's just saying the opposite of what he said 5 minutes ago. And also Pete Hegseth and all these people, they sound like complete lunatics. And with all these sort of fundamentalist Christian prayer sessions and quoting from the Old Testament and all this stuff, they do seem to be completely crazy. And so it's a little bit of a sign of desperation. They're desperate to show that they're tough and strong, and that's not really what comes through. And of course, I said this on Millennial a couple of years ago that I don't think that the American superpower will go away anytime soon. I mean, America will still have by far the largest, strongest military in the world, and also the strongest economy, and that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. But America is not respected It's what I called an Idi Amin superpower. It's sort of like a low IQ African dictator who is lashing out, and it's like a child with a machine gun. It's dangerous, so people will fear it, but it's not really respected. It's not really, it doesn't really have a leadership position. And, Trump asking the European countries for help in this war after attacking them daily for a full year and more, it's not a good look. And it's not really clear what they're trying to accomplish or what the way out will be. So I don't think it's going to be the end of America in any way, but it's certainly an act of desperation, and it's a superpower in decline, lashing out in a very unintelligent way.
So I'll go over to Morgoth. What's your overall take on how this Iran war is going to impact America on the world stage?
I think it's going to be a disaster. I think it's going to be a total disaster. I think they've blundered into this. I mean, I agree pretty much with everything Frodi said. I think it's incompetent and stupid. I think their social capital is being eroded as much as their military sort of prestige. It's just a non-stop disaster. It was poorly planned out. Like, I think just this evening, the first of the troops are arriving there that got like the emergency shuttled them from Japan or somewhere in the east. So none of this was thought out beforehand. They thought they could just kick the door in, whack the Ayatollah, and then get home in time for cornflakes. And the questions that a lot of people are asking, me included, are how could this be so clownish? And it's as if my view is that Trump just seems to have been completely surrounded in this information bubble with Lindsey Graham, Witkoff, Kushner, and Benjamin Netanyahu, because whatever you think of the deep state, they were a bit more competent than this, and they seem to have distanced themselves from it a certain degree as well. This is just Trump's war rather than a full-blown American, carefully thought out, logistics sorted planning. It's just a cowboy shoot. It's just an absolute farce. And the reason I bring that up is because in terms of American prestige on the world, it seems obvious to everybody in the world now that, and I mentioned this with Millennial Wars the other day, that another superpowers in the past, you can say, well, they may have blundered into something which was a bad idea, but it was you always got the impression that they were in charge, that it was a mistake of their own. But when you look around the reaction to this, it's everybody is just saying Trump's just a puppet for Netanyahu. And you see it in the propaganda that's coming out, the Iranian propaganda and the Lego videos, obviously. But then, like, the Chinese did a pumped out a thing yesterday where it had Trump. I didn't know whether it was an eagle or a chicken, but he had a squid on his head, and the squid represented Israel. And it was like the squid was like one of those face sucker things off Alien. And it was directing him to kill and rob, like sort of as if he was brainwashed and he lost all control of his faculties. And so I thought that was interesting because you see what America tells itself and what the Trump administration's telling itself is totally at odds with how everybody else on Earth looks at it. It's like this kind of big tragedy where the joke is on them. What's that song by the Bee Gees? I started the whole world laughing, but the joke was on me. And that I didn't see that the joke was on me. That's kind of the situation that they're in. Unfortunately, now that the Marines are arriving, it's about to turn from farce into tragedy, I think. I don't know what the plans are exactly. Maybe we'll get into that later. But it just seems to get worse and worse day by day. And I think America's reputation on the world stage just shot to pieces because of this. And this is before we even know where it's going to go.
So, Willem, I'll let you jump in. So, what do you think that this entire war means for America's global standing?
Well, first, I agree with pretty much everything that Frodi and Morgoth just said. So I'll just try to kind of add here. Um, Something that comes to mind is that America recently had its military action against Venezuela, but Venezuela is not a real country in the sense of Iran. So I think a lot of Americans saw American military might in that military action against Venezuela, and they thought, well, we can do anything, and maybe that's why it was done leading up to this military action in Iran, because it was the Trump administration and companies attempt to sort of galvanize like support, like get everybody's blood pumping and saying, because you saw a lot of the memery online about how powerful America is and we could just take Greenland if we wanted to, and it really you saw a lot of that kind of mindless banter. But the problem is, Iran's a real country, and it's a real country in a way that even Iraq wasn't a real country. It's mountainous. It has a much more sophisticated intelligentsia. I think its population supports its its leaders and its national identity a lot more. It's very mountainous, so it's not as easy to invade. They have much more support from much bigger countries. It won't be anything like the Iraq War, and so I have to wonder if the authorities really understood that, if they didn't care about it. The idea of putting boots on the ground in Iran, I think that's going to be really disastrous. And I don't want to pretend like I'm some geopolitical military expert or something like that, but I would just foresee, if like boots on the ground actually went there, that casualties on the American side would very quickly approach maybe even like what the total amount of casualties were for the Iraq and Afghanistan war combined in a relatively short period of time. It doesn't seem like anybody has taken anything away from the recent Russian-Ukrainian conflict with drone warfare. Drones have like significantly altered how modern warfare will unfold, and one can make the argument that drone warfare in Ukraine is somewhat unique because there are these flat open plains where there's nowhere to really hide, and maybe the Iranian terrain would alter some of the maybe that would give various troops the ability to hide and not suffer quite as many casualties as in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. But either way, I think it's going to be devastating. Something else that sort of stands out to me is that there aren't any real protests against this like there were against the Iraq war in 2003. And I think that says something. I think that says the public is increasingly nihilistic and apathetic. I mean, people are upset about it and they're expressing their opinions about it online, but there, from what I remember, is that there were massive protests against the Iraq war in the United States. And the fact that there are none today against this war, it says something. Something else that comes to mind is that I always talk about this paper, so forgive me if I go on about this ad infinitum, but Stephen Steinlight wrote this article in the Center for Immigration Studies in 2001, and it was titled "The Jewish Stake and the Changing Demography of the United States." And something he talks about in it is the idea that, he's pretty open and overt about this, so it's not like I'm reading into it. I mean, the article is pretty explicit. He says that Jews will have about 20 years before they can no longer maintain the level of influence that they currently had. And that will be due to changing demographics. He says that, the changing demography will be such that it will be overwhelmingly non-European in nature. And he all but says that, Europeans have had a distinct sensibility toward Israel and the Jews in general. And once those demographics change, the special relationship with Israel will no longer be tenable. And what I kind of glean from that is that at this point in time, Israel and their allies and whatnot don't really care about what the consequences are of this war. They may feel that they have no choice but to do this now, because in the future, they're not going to be able to do it. So they don't care about the... Go ahead.
Well, yeah, actually, that was the point I wanted to make, was that it seems like when you compare something like the Iraq war and the war in Iran today, they spent a huge amount of effort to justify the war. They had this, weapons of mass destruction in Iran, or in Iraq rather, which we now know was not true. They spent a lot of effort building Iraq up as this threat, and that they just had no choice but to go in. And with Afghanistan, they had 9/11. And you can actually look at the Iraq war, even if you think it wasn't justified. It was certainly a lot better. It was a lot better planned. It seems like they actually went into it with some kind of plan. I'm sure that the American military actually executed that war a lot more effectively than they are executing the war in Iran right now. I mean, I'm going to kind of shy away from military analysis because I don't know. I'm not a military man. I'm not a military analyst. And also, it's hard to discern based on the sources that you listen to, because they all.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, at this point, even if you are really into the nitty-gritty details of the military actions, none of the sources are really all that trustworthy. Academic Agent has been pointing out, or making some speculations about certain U.S. ships. I forget the name of the ship, but it's currently semi-disabled in the area. And there are some indications that the problems might be a lot more grave than anybody's letting on. And so I guess the point to be made here is that we might not get a real accurate military analysis of any of the fine details until much later, because it's really not in any it's not necessarily in any of the parties' vested interests to divulge what exactly is going on. There might be serious problems on that particular vessel, but no one's really going to openly talk about it. So,
but I get the sense though that I'll hand it over just one second. But I get the sense though that they're just kind of going all out. Trump, but also the folks around him, people like Witkoff and Kushner and Netanyahu and Lindsey Graham and Mike Huckabee, this crowd of these hardcore Zionist Jews and these very odd radical Christian Zionists. It seems like they kind of see the writing on the wall that this is the last time America is ever going to have this this is the last time Israel is ever going to have this overwhelming amount of support from the United States. And if they want to have their greater Israel project, because they're actually thinking long term, unlike Trump, who thinks in terms of like 12-hour news cycles, people like Netanyahu, they're actually thinking about the next century, and they're thinking of their greater Israel project, or at least exerting themselves in the region. And I think that they have to kind of see the writing on the wall. When you look at the support for Israel in the United States, it's just absolutely tanking among anyone under the age of 60 on both the left and the right. I mean, they've already lost the left completely. It's a pretty much an untenable position for anyone on the left to be supportive of Israel at all at this point. And on the right, it's becoming that way as well. It's only just these old boomer neocons, and it's these radical Christian Zionists who are all in their 70s, or people who are Jewish themselves. And that's all the support base they have left, or just this army of paid influencers who everyone can see how fake they are and how they clearly have a conflict of interest. And I just don't think that Israel's going to have the opportunity, and they're never going to have that opportunity to have someone as subservient to them like Donald Trump in office again. So it kind of seems like that's why they've just gone for it without there being really any kind of plan. I mean, another thing to point out is that it seems like the war aims are different. So from what I get from Donald Trump, he seems to think that he was going to create a regime change in Iran, that he was just going to bomb the Ayatollah and a few of the Iranian leaders, and then the Iranian people were just going to do a regime change themselves. Whereas I think that Israel they just want Iran to be a weak state. So they just want it to be chaotic and unable to exert itself, so that they can exert themselves geopolitically in the Middle East. Whereas they don't necessarily want it to be this liberal pro-Western regime. They just want it to be one that's dysfunctional. And I think it seems like with Trump's plan, he just didn't seem to have any plan. But the plan from Israel's perspective seems to just be destroy Iran while we still have America's backing, because we're not going to have that in the future. I think that might be where that kind of desperation and the lack of planning and lack of justification, lack of any attempt to justify the war really comes from.
Yeah, it does seem that the Trump regime, the Trump administration, was led to believe that they could just that the whole thing would fall in. And I think it's because he was getting his information from Tel Aviv and not the Pentagon. Like it's as simple as that. And so there's like people will say, well, he was all in with them. He's been with them for decades, and he's somebody said in my comments yesterday, he's spiritually Jewish. And it's like, but you can see that they do have like different aims, and because there's a lot of confusion about what happens, and the pattern that's happened consistently since the very start of the war is where you get the sense that Trump wants to tackle, he wants to de-escalate things. It's Trump who makes these stupid threats and then backs down on them. And then he doesn't want to hit critical infrastructure. And then he also says, actually, there's some talks going on. We're having a meeting. We're going to try and make some deals. And then it's no sooner, like literally within an hour, you can guarantee that the Israelis, like they did yesterday, they blew up some the steelworks the other day, or they'll blow up some critical energy or take pot shots at a nuclear power plant. And the pattern is that they do that as soon as Trump has signaled that he wants to try and cool things down a little bit. And it's like they're sending them a message as if to say, no, look, we're both in this now. It's do or die. You don't get to chicken out. You don't get to do this in half measures. We're in it together. I mean, even then, it also like it's also just obvious, and it's just amazing that they seem unable to get a grip on this, given that in theory they've got so much leverage over Israel. And what I've noticed today is that there's stuff going around in the newspapers, which some people are saying is being planted, but there's a story like in the Telegraph in Britain that J.D. Vance has had this like really heated, furious telephone conversation with Netanyahu, saying that, basically saying what I've just said, saying that the war aims as presented by him, what's turned out to be completely false. Now, some people are saying this is because Vance is worried that he's going to go down with the ship here because he wants to be president in 2028. But the long and the short of it is they do both have completely different aims, and Israel is determined that there'll be no off-ramps and that they're going to be in this for the long haul. And the issue here is that it's far away from America, and they don't have all of the munitions in the world. And on the ship that got hit, it's kind of the confused messaging that we're getting. The aircraft carrier Gerald Ford, they told this story that the lint in the laundry room caught fire, and it took them 30 hours, the crew, 30 hours to put the fire out. And straight away, people were confused, because you'd think that if it was like a professional navy, it was sailors, how could you have let a fire rage on board for 30 hours? Like, are they not trained specifically to make sure that doesn't happen, to get on top of these things as fast as possible? I mean, all of those oil tankers that's in their crew will probably be more adept at handling a fire than that. But it doesn't matter anyway, because yesterday Trump came out, he was giving a speech somewhere, and he said that there was more than 100 ballistic missiles got fired at the Gerald Ford. But the way he was framing it was that it was an amazing thing. There was 100 ballistic missiles fired at the Gerald Ford from 17 different directions. And Trump said that they let loose with all of the interceptors and Patriots and neutralized them, shot them out the sky. But the thing is, he was kind of framing that as if like, oh, isn't our technology amazing? But because his brain has turned to porridge, and he's just constantly lying, and he doesn't really know what he's doing, what he did there was betray the truth, that it wasn't actually the laundry basket that caught fire. It was that the Iranians were hammering it with missiles. Now, they didn't sink it, but the point is, it's the Ford has to. I don't know how severely it's been damaged, but it has had to limp back to a safe port somewhere. I think it might be on its all the way back to America, or they're sending it to Greece. But this is like the flagship this is like the capital ship of the American military, or one of the 3 or 4, and it's just been pounded like that, and it's out of action. It's no longer in the fight, and Trump is trying to sell this as a win, because he doesn't see the sort of the implications of what he's saying. And this is typical. This is what we're getting day after day. It's just this unbelievable incompetence, but also that America seems more and more to be like a paper tiger.
So I'll just add that if anyone wants to send super chats, you can send them through Entropy. So the link is down at the bottom of the screen, and you can probably find it on either DLive or Odysee as well. So I'll pass it over to Frodi. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think we should not assume that there's much thought behind there might be, but there's also an element of just Trump being a Caligula figure. And he has conducted some sort of Stalinist purge of the administration and so on, and of the people running America. And people saw how it went last time around, that everyone who said anything against him or gave him advice he didn't like was fired. And so everyone knows that you're not supposed to say anything that Trump doesn't like. And so everyone who might think this is a bad idea will hold their tongue. And some people even resign because they think this is a bad idea. And it seems like everyone who knows these matters and understands these matters in the American military and so on would have advised against it, and would have understood the situation with the Strait of Hormuz, and would have understood that there wouldn't be a regime change by just bombing Iran like this and so on. And so there is an element of Trump just being a kooky old man doing what he wants, and no one has the guts to say that it's a bad idea or to advise against it. And so he surrounds himself with yes men. And it seems like he has weird ideas about America and his sort of own megalomania. I mean, he said before that if he was president during the Vietnam War, then America would have won that war. And it's only because of, I forget what he said, political correctness and, people just being weak. And if everyone was just tough like him, then America could do whatever it wanted. And so I think there is an element of just Trump believing that the U.S. can do anything, that the U.S. is like Superman and can go around the world and do whatever, and no one can put up any resistance. And the only reason why that hasn't happened lately in the same way is because the leaders have been corrupt or weak and so on. And so I think there's an element of Trump just being crazy and no one really being able to advise against his actions. And so, I think we should entertain both possibilities, that there is actually a plan here and that there actually is not really much of a plan, other than Trump thinking that, well, we can do whatever we want. There is an element of that. And I think it's also, like Wilhem said, that, it seems like he's living in a sort of an information bubble, that he has a twisted view of how the world works. There's a sort of an arrogance. And it's the same way with, if you compare the Russia-Ukraine situation, it seems like Putin in that situation genuinely thought that, maybe 30% of the Ukrainians would put up a fight, but 70% of them would just welcome a Russian invasion. And so it would all be over in a short while. And now he's stuck there after, we're on the 5th year and it's a complete disaster and nothing is going according to plan. And I think in a very similar way, Donald Trump thinks that the U.S. can just go in and do anything, go in and kick ass. And he's delusional about what America can do. And so, I mean, he's probably as surprised as anyone. He's probably surprised that it hasn't ended yet, this whole situation. So I think that, just Trump's personal insanity is probably an important factor here.
Well, I feel like with Trump, I don't think he had a plan. I definitely think that people like Netanyahu and Witkoff and Kushner, they all had a plan, and they're feeding Trump, false information to get him to go along with their agenda. But then they're not really being honest with him with what they actually want. I feel like though at this point that Trump is reaching Joe Biden levels of senility because he's no longer of sound mind. When you see some of these clips, if you compare them to a Donald Trump clip from even a decade ago, or even during his first term, he was a lot sharper. I mean, I know he still had the same personality, but he seems to be to have slowed down so much. He's not as clear. He's trying to be the same kind of assertive guy, but it's really kind of coming across as weak. He just kind of comes across as some like old grandpa who's like just ranting mindlessly while his family members are just sitting around him, not nodding along because they're too afraid. But other than I mean, what's shocking though is despite Trump's deteriorated mental state, he seems to be wielding like a ridiculous amount of power with zero checks and balances. So it doesn't seem like anyone was vetted. None of the plans were vetted. He didn't have to go through Congress to get the approval for any of this stuff. He just seems to have just done it himself. And what you can see with his daily posts is that he'll come out with this giant wall of text on Truth Social. One day he'll declare that Iran has been totally destroyed. I think it was the second or third day of the war that he said that they would get unconditional surrender, kind of LARPing as if he were Dwight Eisenhower at the end of World War II or something. And then the next day he'll say that he's negotiating with Iran. And then Iran says, no, we're not. We're not actually negotiating with Trump. One day he'll say that the Strait of Hormuz is actually open, but Iran needs to open it, and the NATO allies need to come and help America open the Strait of Hormuz. But they don't actually need the Strait of Hormuz, and it seems like his version of the truth. It just doesn't reflect reality, and we're kind of in this weird situation where the guy who's supposedly calling the shots, definitely the guy who gave his seal of approval for the plan to go forward, he just seems to be living in this information bubble where he's being fed things which everyone just observing from social media. I mean, we're not even on the ends. We're just watching this stuff play out on X, but you can clearly see that these Truth Social posts do not reflect reality in the least. I have to wonder, like, for example, the plan, what's his name? Robert Barnes. There was a great clip of him going around X a few days ago where he was basically saying how what he said was that Trump had gone King Lear mad, that he had spent years warning against a war in Iran. He had said he was campaigning against putting troops on the ground, that he would never start a war in Iran. He years ago he was saying how much of a disaster Bush's war in Iraq was. Or, for example, another thing that Robert Barnes pointed out is that the U.S. intelligence knew that simply dropping bombs on Iran was not going to cause a regime change. They knew that if Iran was attacked, they were going to block off the Strait of Hormuz. When I was in university, I did a course on business in the Middle East, and I was told in this course 10 years ago by my university professor, intelligent guy, but this is just standard knowledge, that if America were ever to attack Iran, Iran would block the Strait of Hormuz, and that would cause a major oil disruption throughout the world. So, I mean, if that's something that a layman knows, how did this information not reach the White House? You have to think that he's just being fed he's just being fed lies by these people, and or anyone who says something that he doesn't like, he'll just send them away and refuse to listen. I have to think that he had been briefed on these things, but that he just didn't like how it sounded. He just didn't like anyone coming in telling him that, if you just drop some bombs on Iran, it's not actually just going to have a regime change overnight, and no one's going to hail you as a hero, like with Venezuela. I think that might have played into it as well, that I think the Venezuela operation may have inflated Trump's ego to an extent, that he thought that America was just invincible and they could just do anything. But that clearly hasn't been the case. But it was just really bizarre that he keeps coming out with all these Truth Social posts, but it's almost like what the president says doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And
No,
if,
I mean,
if
but the point is that I think that's the thing, the arrogance, Trump's arrogance. He thinks that maybe if someone warned against it and said this thing about the Strait of Hormuz and whatever, the truth, the limits of reality don't apply to him. He can just do whatever. And mental decline is definitely a factor. And so he's an old man but his self-image is that of America when he was a young man, when America was much more powerful relatively to the rest of the world. And now America's relative power has declined, although it's still the single strongest country on the planet, but its relative power on the global stage has declined. And I think he does not really want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth like considering the mess that America's in here, like the bear trap that it's in as well, because it plays into more of Trump's madness. For example, Iran's been sanctioned for its oil for 47 years. They've now been lifted. They've actually lifted the sanctions on Iran. They've allowed, apparently Vladimir Putin is now earning $750 million a day because now Russia is one of the biggest oil export in the world. And yet you think that's crazy enough. So they were sanctioned, they've been lifted. And then on top of that, on top of lifting the sanctions on Iran so that Iran's making bank on this now, although the country's being wrecked, but they're also, it's not that the Straits of Hormuz are completely shut. They're actually waving through Chinese tankers. I just saw that they've managed to wave through 30 Pakistani tankers. So what's happened is that the West is now being sanctioned. Iran is sanctioning the West. And somehow Trump has had to sort of join the dots of that in his mind, where America's all powerful, we can do whatever we want, we are the smartest, we are the cleverest, but then he still has to sign off on these decisions which totally contradict everything to do with American sort of geopolitics and the strategy that they've had for years. It's all thrown out. The country they've sanctioned is the one that they've lifted sanctions on the country they're at war with. And the reason he's done this is because one of the things you'll notice is that he acts tough on a Friday night when the markets close, and then he's like a weak little mouse when they open again on Monday morning. You always get the tough talk, you always get the threats on Friday night, and then it's always tackle on the Monday morning. And people on the markets have actually sort of keyed that in. They've baked that into their calculations. Although what happened last Monday, when people were buying the dip just before Trump made that announcement, it did speak to insider trading. Like, so you've got like these podcasters, these lunatics like Pete Hegseth, you've got these Zionists in there, and these real estate agents, and it just looks like gangsterism. It just looks like outright geopolitically incompetent and totally corrupt as well. Where apparently Trump's made $1.5 billion since he came to office. So it's just this rampant, as Frodi said, like Caligula, like late stage Rome, degrees of stupidity and corruption and cruelty. But the trap, the nature of the bear trap that America's in is really serious. And I'm not sure how they get out of it. So option one is they actually do a full-blown tackle. They pull out of the Middle East. They load up all what's left of their stuff from the bases, all of the bases across the Middle East have been wrecked. Totally wrecked, 13 bases totally destroyed, because it turns out those little Gulf states where America had these bases, that was just about protecting Israel all along. They were just being used as to plant the radar systems there so that when missiles came over, Israel had an extra 15 or 20 minutes warning. So when they got knocked out, the Iron Dome got knocked out as well. So Israel's just getting pounded. So let's just say option one is full tackle, then they leave Israel in the lurch, totally leave Israel in the lurch, where to the degree where Iran would have to put some kind of offer some kind of means by which Israel could surrender. And that on top of that, it means America would have been kicked out of the Middle East entirely. And it'll probably never get back because Iran will just pull that same trick with the Straits of Hormuz. And it'll be even a couple of years' time, it'll be even more difficult to take on Iran because as we speak, Russia and China are just flooding the place with weapons and radar systems. So this is the consequences of tackle. Option one, which is terrible for America. Option two is where they stay put and they carry on the fight, which I don't know how they can do. How they can do that. It looks increasingly likely that they're going to put boots on the ground and do it the kind of blood and guts way, which is just going to make, that means that it's going to take a long time. The Strait of Hormuz remain shut, and there's no there's no guarantee that they can actually do it. But the body count is going to skyrocket. Let's not forget that when they did the initial Desert Storm, which obviously was just rolling tanks across the desert with artillery, tanks, armor, and air support, they also had 500,000 men. If you look at it now, I think there's another 10,000 on the way, but you're looking at maybe 15,000 fighting men, but there's not really any possibility of large numbers of tanks. And even if they did, they'd just be blown up in all of those winding passages and valleys and mountainous terrain that Iran's got to offer. And so I don't see how they can to invade the country and do it that way. And I don't see how they can do the tackle. I just don't see what is the off-ramp here. I don't see anything. I just see an unfolding disaster. But if they leave the Middle East, part of Iran's strategy here is to tank the petrodollar. So that's why they're saying, well, if you want to do business in the Middle East, you'll pay in yuan, the Chinese currency, which is to say they're going after the petrodollar itself. Now, in the face of that calamity for America, you have to think that there's going to be people in the deep state, people in the banking sector and the central banks who are going to be saying to Trump, it doesn't matter how many men die. We need this resolved quickly. If you've got a way to do it without bloodshed, without further bloodshed, then do that. Or if it takes 100,000 men to invade Iran to secure the Straits of Hormuz or whatever, then you'll have to do it that way. But one way or another, this has to get resolved. And it'll have to get resolved quickly as well, because the countries are already running out of energy supply. And it's more than just energy supply. I'll just wrap this up in a second here. It's not just that people won't be able to put petrol in their cars, but that power stations will fail and farmers don't have fertilizer for crops, which could lead to a famine. Like this is an absolutely dire situation.
I mean, one thing that is striking to me is just how much America, as supposedly the global superpower, is putting into the interests of Israel. I mean, I know that everybody knows about this, and it's something which is an open secret today. I remember back on the internet 10 years ago, it was something that was just like an internet memes. But today, I mean, it's there for the world to see. But I mean, what does it say about America as a global power that they're just so beholden to this one other state? Because when you look at like what they've done, so they've basically reneged on their commitments in Ukraine. They've left Europe to foot the bill. They've and hung them out to dry there. They've stabbed Europe in the back. They've stabbed Ukraine in the back. I've even heard that they're now taking missiles that are in South Korea, which are meant to deter an invasion from the north, and sending those over to Israel. I don't know what's going on with a place like Taiwan, but I wonder will they take resources and military power that's designated to that area and redesignate that to Israel? None of this is of any kind of strategic benefit for America as a global superpower. It's all just for this conflict of interest, which exists in the United States due to the Zionist lobby. And then when you factor in the fact that markets are now tanking. You see those squares where it's like all the stocks on the market are going down. Oil prices are going up, and it's just one calamity after another. America's reputation, the economy, and then we're now looking at potentially troops being deployed and a high casualty count. Now, I don't because would a drawn out war resemble a disaster like Ukraine was for Russia? I don't think that America can possibly do that, because I think that Trump would be removed from office. He doesn't have that amount. He doesn't have the degree of power as someone like Vladimir Putin does, where he can commit hundreds of thousands of troops and suffer hundreds of thousands of casualties and still hold on to political power. Donald Trump doesn't have that ability. I don't think that the United States could do that. But the fact that just all of this is being thrown at the geopolitical interests of Israel, and it's kind of just this now small cabal of Zionists and these old boomer neocons and these radical evangelical Christian Zionists that are calling the shots. But the entire world is suffering the consequences of this little clique in the United States and their obsession with this little state in the Middle East. What does that say for America as a superpower? I mean, it's a strange situation to be in. I think Morgoth had said earlier that you get the sense with superpowers in the past, they were at least on their own side. So something like the British Empire or China today or the Roman Empire, you never got the sense that there was this little separate country far off whose interests they put above their own. But that's what you get. That's what you see with the United States. Willem, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just a quick apology before. It's raining really hard here, and I have a plastic skylight, and so the sound might be leaking through, and I apologize if it's overbearing. It actually might start hailing in a second. I always have the worst timing, it seems. But what comes to mind here is radical individualism, and I think this is where radical individualism in the United States leads. It leads to individualist whites who are incentivized almost to cater to. Oh, man, it's getting really loud here. Sorry. Actually, it might be better if somebody else talked for a while. And
sure.
Wait until it settles down.
Yeah, no problem. Do one of you guys want to jump in?
Yeah, it's actually funny you mentioned that, nowadays everyone knows, it's sort of like an open secret. And just the other day, a couple of days ago, one evening here in the week, I was down at the local bar having a beer and just chit-chatting with the bartender. This just a normal girl in her like 20s or something like that, early 20s, just a bartender, random bartender. And she mentioned, she brought up Israel, and she even made comments about, quote unquote, the painter. And that was just a random bartender. And that's the jargon in the younger generation these days. So it's definitely an open secret. It's not even a secret in any way anymore. The way this world works and how the wars work and so on. So that's definitely a change, and a bad hit for the reputation of the U.S. that they're doing this for another country that has nothing really to do with U.S. interests. But also, I think it's important to look at how this is humiliating for the U.S. In terms of its relationship with the other NATO countries in Europe, because early on in this attack on Iran, the U.S. had to leave an airbase in Spain. Trump has been trying to get other countries in Europe to participate in this war, and they're saying no. And so he's trying to flex his muscles. He's trying to intimidate other countries. And, this right after his threat against Greenland. And remember that NATO soldiers had orders to fire on American soldiers if they tried to invade. I mean, this is like a real situation. And right after that, he gets the humiliation with trying to get other countries to participate in his insane war. And they're all saying no. And I know that, a lot of people are critical of how some European leaders, how they're in their rhetoric, and they've sort of been very cautious in their criticism and so on. But the fact of the matter is that it's just a clear contrast between how it is now and how it has been in the past, when other countries have participated in America's wars, and so that's changed, and that has really harmed America's standing on the global stage, when they've effectively alienated their all of their closest allies, including Canada and the European countries that have been most loyal to the U.S., including Denmark. Denmark had plenty of soldiers in Afghanistan, and their casualties relative to population size was comparable with the U.S. itself. And there was, I haven't seen it myself, but I saw in the just news headlines that there was some sort of shouting match between Kaja Kallas, the EU representative, and Marco Rubio. There was sort of a shouting match between them over geopolitical issues and so on. So my only point here is that this just shows a deterioration of America's ability to exercise any kind of influence, diplomatic influence over countries that it has been working with very closely for many decades. And Donald Trump's erratic behavior has just completely destroyed America's standing on the global stage. And he's pretended that, no, America doesn't, in his usual arrogance, he's pretended that the U.S. doesn't need allies, but now it turns out they actually do. And that was obviously predictable, but it's not a good look. It's really a sign of sort of desperation or confusion. It's not really a sort of a strong image that he's building here. I think Wilhem is back now.
Yeah, I was. The rain has died down a little bit, so I guess I can try again. Basically, what I think is what we're seeing on display right now is the culmination of radical atomized individualism in the United States, and I think it's still sort of unacceptable, more or less, for most white Americans to take a collective stance, take their own collective side, and because the individualism reigns supreme, you just see more and more white people incentivized to ally with various minority groups, various, quote unquote minority groups, various special ethnic interest groups. Before or up until now, it's been mostly, Jewish, but you're seeing more and more of this take place with Indians. And I think that's what the United States will kind of descend to. It will descend into a kind of sectarian conflict between all these different ethnic groups, and unfortunately, what I suspect will continue to happen for the foreseeable future is that white Americans won't collectivize and take their own side. They will instead continually ally with various third parties because it'll be beneficial for them to do that in this environment of radical individualism. It's almost like a vicious feedback loop, if that makes any sense to anybody. But I wrote an article about this, or somewhat about this, called "The Tyranny of the Individual," and I just think that this is sort of the natural conclusion of the height of post-war individualism, just this descent into sectarian interests conflicting with one another in the United States, in the West, and you'll probably continue to see various white individuals ally themselves with these various groups.
I mean, one thing I wanted to point out that's related to what Frodi was saying, there are just so many unforced errors. So, as we all know, Donald Trump spent a year insulting Canada, insulting Europe, threatening to annex Canada, threatening to invade Greenland. So, from what I read, the Danish army actually had plans drawn up to blow up the airport in Greenland and to blow up the rail line. So they were actually taking it seriously. They actually had plans drawn up for what if the United States actually invaded. Of course, it didn't happen, and it was all just a bunch of hot air coming out of Donald Trump for his own ego. They had the gall a year ago to call the EU warmongers for increasing military spending in response to a war which Russia was waging in Ukraine. So it wasn't even for to launch a war. It was just a defensive measure. And we all know that there was that Jerry Springer episode which took place in the White House between Vance, Trump, and Zelensky. It's really kind of embarrassing behavior on the part of the Trump admin. But all this stuff, they didn't need to do it. After the Greenland thing, it was only a couple of weeks before the invasion of Iran that Trump said that NATO allies fought from behind, that they stayed a little back in Afghanistan, which is just an outrageous comment when you look at the amount of casualties that NATO allies suffered in Afghanistan when they entered the war on the behest of the United States. The United States invoked Article 5 after 9/11, and all of the NATO allies, so countries like Denmark, countries like Canada, which Donald Trump has made threats against the territorial integrity of, these countries contributed to the war in Afghanistan. And then just before launching this war in Iran, he goes and insults their efforts the last time the United States asked for their assistance with a war in the Middle East. And I mean, even if it's the Zionist lobby, it's Zionist power that's behind the war, it's America serving Israel's interests. I mean, that's definitely the case, and it was the case in Iraq as well in 2003. But there were none of these unforced errors. Like the George Bush didn't go out and insult didn't go out and insult Tony Blair and have a shouting match with him in the White House and say that Britain was weak and everything. But just before he went to Tony Blair to convince him to invade Iraq along with him, it's just these unforced errors, which. One thing it says about America as a superpower is that it's not a very competent one anymore. I think one thing that Frodi said earlier, that America will still be the most powerful country in the world, but proportionally its power will decline. I think that's going to be the case, and a lot of people have talked about World War III. I don't think there's going to be a World War III, or at least not in the foreseeable future, in the immediate future. But what I think is going to happen is that wars will just break out around the world. So things like what you're seeing between Israel and Gaza and Lebanon, something like the war in Ukraine, which is already ongoing. You might see countries like, and again, I'm not like a geopolitical expert or anything, so I don't know have deep knowledge of these conflicts. Maybe something like Azerbaijan and Armenia, or you'll see something like maybe even China will go for Taiwan, because America really just can't exert itself as the world policeman anymore. Do you want to jump in, Morgoth?
Well, I mean, just on the China issue, China, because Taiwan is obviously closely allied and in cahoots with America, they are now also going to suffer because of the oil and energy situation. And last week, China said, well, look, this is not looking very good for you, because they've got an endless supply of energy coming in from Russia. They've also got these massive reserves that they've been hoarding for years and years. And they basically said to Taiwan, like, you're going to go under. Like, why not just come back, just join us without a single bullet being fired? And you're guaranteed your energy supply. You can carry on making your fancy AI chips, whatever those things are that are so lucrative. But you'll be back under the Chinese umbrella, nice and safe. Now, what they're saying there is that you can't trust America. America is erratic, it is stupid, and it's getting itself all into trouble. And it's directly responsible for leaving you in the lurch like that. And they can point to South Korea, which is now being stripped of all of its defenses, to say against North Korea, to say when it comes down to it, they won't even defend you. I mean, Trump was literally calling like Britain cowards. I think it was the European countries, but Britain in particular, because Keir Starmer's just been like, we're not having anything to do with this. And he literally, like, an all caps rant on Truth Social that they're cowards. We are all cowards, meaning the government's like. And so America's vassals are kind of looking and saying maybe Taiwan could think, actually, it may be better just to be with China. Like, well, what do I get out of this relationship with America? What is anybody getting out of it? And so the incentive to remain with America when they're just going to leave you in the lurch and stab you in the back, like they did with South Korea, like they did with all of those little Gulf states, where the Iranians are saying, look, the reason you're getting bombed day and night is because America has used you as meat shields for Israel. And even then, what they're actually targeting are the American bases, American banks, and like a hotel. Dubai is a perfect example of this, because Dubai is like dying. It's finished. And what it was doing, the reason why you had all these Instagram influencers, whatever the hell that is, but it wasn't just that. You would get people doing business there because you didn't pay tax. And the whole idea was that it was a little oasis of stability in the Middle East, where you could live a tax-free life, a tax-free haven. So you got all of these kind of grifters and hustlers going over there, investors. And you see them like 2 or 3 weeks ago, the British government was having to bail them all out and put special flights on to get them out of a war zone. The airport was being bombed. You were seeing drones fly past them, Shahed drones flying past these lucrative high-rise apartment blocks and all the rest of it. And so if you don't have actually any roots in a place, you don't have a kind of ancestry there, you don't have a kind of blood connection there, then you'll just leave as soon as it becomes unstable and the incentives dry up. And all of this is built on a lie. The lie was that America would guarantee the safety of these countries in the Middle East, and it just didn't. It was all a lie. It was all just to protect Israel. There was a possibility to carve out a bit of a niche there. I mean, part of the problem that you see in the Middle East in general is just how fragile these countries are. You can destroy Saudi Arabia as a functioning civilization with about 10 bombs by taking out the desalination plants, by taking out the oil refineries, the oil plants. You blow all of that up, and it's just like the Arabs are back to the desert. They're just back to being nomads on camels wandering around in the desert. And it's like this kind of fiat civilization in the Middle East, which has popped up. And there's something kind of poetic where Iran is a much more ancient, proper nation state that goes back thousands and thousands of years. And it's as if they're bringing them back to reality. They're saying, look, we're going to bring you back to what you were, what you are meant to be, instead of this kind of fake petrodollar grift, which is all of these glassy, flashy hotels and apartment blocks. But it's all quite literally built on sand, building skyscrapers on sand, where the only water you've got to drink is processed seawater. It's all a fugazi, and you see it now. And in a certain way, it reflects the dollar itself. It reflects the American fiat system itself.
So we're headed into the second hour. I'm going to look at a few of the super chats. So we have a few. They're all from Disembodied Voice, but if anyone else would like to send super chats, the link is it should be in the description, and I can also paste it in the chat once again, on Odysee. So if you'd like to ask any questions to the panel tonight, you can send some questions on entropy. So the first one here from Disembodied Voice: No Greg, no party. Where is our esteemed host? He's away this week, but I'm not exactly sure what he's up to, but he wasn't able to host the stream, so he asked me to do it instead. He should be back next week or within the next couple of weeks. I don't really have an answer for what Greg's up to this week, though. So I have another question from Disembodied Voice. So it says, dual question. Answer if you wish. Was this Iran war inevitable? The fell for it again crowd were saying this would happen. Are they vindicated? Have people who supported Trump 24, as in 2024, got egg on their face? And the second question is, Has Trump's gambit of war with Iran plus a few botched deportations been worth it? Well, this question is actually related to something that I wanted to get into as well, because we've been talking about what this war means for geopolitically for America and how they're executing the war. But what does it mean politically, both within America, but also within the broader Western world? Because this is something I do have a lot to say about. So I think that when you look at the MAGA base, Trump ran on no more forever wars. Back in 2016, he said that he would not get the United States into more wars in the Middle East. This was MAGA 101. It was this and closing the border and deportations. That was what MAGA was supposed to be about initially. But this war has just been a total betrayal of that. But one thing you've seen, and it's been a lot worse in Trump's second term than the first one, is that over the past year, MAGA has kind of cultivated this crowd of arrogant, loudmouthed influencers whose job it is to blindly praise everything Donald Trump does, and also seemingly tell every other country how your country's finished and how Britain is cucked and Canada's finished and Europe has fallen, and kind of just putting out this very obnoxious rhetoric, both relentlessly praising Donald Trump as if it were some kind of cult of personality, but then also deriding every other Western country. Which, I mean, that's one thing that's irritated me. That's the one thing that's irritated me the most about the MAGA crowd. And now they're kind of in this situation that they sold Donald Trump 2024 as no more forever wars. And now they're kind of either having to backtrack, or they're trying to, like save face. They're going to continue their arrogant boasting by sane washing what Trump is doing, or trying to rationalize the outright betrayal. One line that they have come out with is they're saying, well, when Donald Trump said no more wars, he didn't mean peace. He meant peace through strength, meaning more wars. But that's not even what peace through strength means. It means that you're so strong that no one would dare start a war against you. But Donald Trump spent the first year of his presidency dismantling all of America's alliances, making America much weaker and making war a lot more likely. So it was the exact opposite of peace through strength. But I think that what you're going to see is, are the forever, what's it called? No, the fell for it again. Are the fell for it again crowd vindicated? Well, in some ways. I mean, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who isn't American. So from the American perspective, maybe I'll let Wilhem answer this one. Was the work that Donald Trump did on the border, what are the things with ICE and shutting down illegal immigration? Now, I know he hasn't actually he hasn't really fulfilled that promise, but though he has done a few good things, was that actually worth it? Well, maybe I'll hand that question over to Wilhem. But what I will say in regards to both Canada and Europe is that I really feel that the right needs to have this kind of de-MAGAization. So all of these right-wing parties in Europe, all the right in Canada, so the Conservative Party, who I'm no fan of, and all these other smaller populist parties, they have to discard the MAGA brand. Like, there's this problem where because America is the biggest country in the world and it influences everyone, all the media comes out of America. It seems like the entire world kind of follows after America. So what goes on in the United States happens elsewhere. And what's kind of happened over the last 10 years is that the idea is that Donald Trump is the right. He is the right in America, but also in Europe and in Canada as well. But the problem is that this is now a toxic brand, and it's only going to get worse and worse as the effects of Trump's war in Iran, in addition to everything else he has done, as those effects are really felt, it's going to be this very toxic brand. And I really think that the right needs to get away from Donald Trump. I don't know what the solution is in the United States, but I would say in terms of Europe and Canada, you just have to disassociate yourself from the Zionist lobby, from MAGA, from the entire kind of populist aesthetic. It's just going to be a toxic brand. So I'll hand it over to Wilhem. I'll hand it over to Wilhem first to answer the question, since he's an American. Was it worth it? So were some of the positives which Trump has pulled off, maybe with, say, shutting down illegal immigration and greatly reducing that, or maybe some of the things that ICE has done? Would you say it has been worth it in relation to what's gone on in the last couple of weeks?
No, no, I don't think so. I don't think I can say a whole lot about this other than like, I don't think the numbers about immigration going down are really all that accurate. I think a lot of the numbers people tout, like the self-deportations and all of that. I think that's a lot of it's nonsense. When I was back in the U.S. recently, it was like towns that were virtually 100% white growing up were around where I live. I mean, they were, I'd walk into the local Walmart and it was like I was back in Latin America, only worse. When I flew into the airport, I heard nothing but Haitian and Spanish at the airport. Like sometimes there'd be a little bit of English. Like the situation in the U.S. is really, really extreme, and I don't think a lot of Europeans understand how bad it actually is, because you see a lot of them trying to politically ally themselves with MAGA and right-wing politics in the U.S. because currently they view it as strong to some extent. But England, I think, despite all of its problems, is in a much better position to turn the tide on demographic change and take back their country and whatnot. Americans in general. I think a lot of people, I think the whole question, a fell for it again crowd, I think most right-wing Americans are fooling themselves. Like, I don't think they're actually serious about deportations and sending people back. I think it would be really inconvenient for a lot of people. And I think America is a country like built on individualism and convenience. And like, I was talking to Frodi about this on one of our Kalurgistan streams, or not streams, but recordings. The example I typically go to is this white American Florida roofer who voted for MAGA, voted for Trump, was all excited about deportations, but then when his employees started to get deported, he got upset. And he's like, well, I didn't sign up for this. And he's like, and then he starts playing the small violin, talking about how this disrupts families and whatnot. And, I seriously just don't think like a lot of the people who go on about, oh, you fell for it again. I mean, the people who fell for it again, yeah, they fell for it again. But the people often putting out that meme saying that, I think they're fooling themselves. I think a lot of people aren't really all that serious about any of this. I think the U.S. is fundamentally unserious about quite a lot of things. And if I can just tack something onto this real quick, something I've been trying to get at and haven't been able to get at because of the rain here, and I haven't had an opportunity to say it, but everybody's been talking here on the panel about America dismantling all of its allies. Something that I think is ironically happening in response to that in Europe is maybe this new EU trade agreement with India, which is terrible because, it's going to encourage this influx of Indians into Europe. It's not a good alliance at all from any of our perspectives, but it might ironically be the result of MAGA and right-wing politics in the U.S. sort of forcing Europe to consider other options. And I guess the European Trade Commission and related parties think the best option in this case is something like India. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So I'll hand it over to Morgoth or Frodi. I'll let you guys each take a turn to answer this question. What I wanted to ask was that how is this going to impact the right in Europe? So the problem is that so much of right-wing politics in the West over the past decade has been tied to MAGA and to the figure of Donald Trump. And now, one problem you have is that the second Trump administration has just been such a train wreck that it's actually helped the liberal establishment in Europe regain political capital, which they had spent years losing. So what should the right in Europe do in response to the disaster which MAGA has become? I'll hand it over to Frodi first.
Yeah, well, I was... I'm obviously also not from the U.S., so I don't vote in the U.S., but just from a meta-political perspective, I was enthusiastic about Donald Trump in the 2016 election, which I explained back then, not because I thought he would do anything very important when he got into office, but for the effect his candidacy and his presidency had on political discourse. Basically, that he brought the discussion of immigration and immigration problems and so on into the mainstream, because before that, it was sort of a taboo topic that was not supposed to be discussed. and now we had the American president talking about mass immigration as a problem, and I thought that had an important metapolitical effect. But after that, I thought that, whatever good he was going to do, he's already done. So I didn't expect much from him. And leading up to this election, I was encouraging everyone to disassociate completely from the MAGA movement, because I thought it was clear and obvious that Donald Trump would be a complete disaster. He is older, not as sharp as he was before. And also, he has just been spreading nihilism. His Jerry Springer style has just become even more exaggerated since the last time around. And so now he's just gone completely crazy. And so he has served to discredit the right and everyone who has, and everything that's been associated with him. And he's just brought chaos. And I think that America's decline is sort of, there is an element of that that is sort of a Spenglerian decline. It's just a civilizational cycle that America has reached this point, and so it's in a sort of a steady decline. But I think just the business as usual, the political establishment as usual, would have done a better job at handling that. You don't have to blow everything up and bring about chaos and war through that person's narcissism and sort of madness, mental issues. I think that just the business as usual would have been the lesser evil. And so that's why there's one of the reasons why I've encouraged everyone in the right to disassociate from Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. And it's unfortunate, just like you said, Endeavor, that of course, America being a superpower, what happens in America there's a sort of a ripple effect that affects every other country in the West. And this and it happened also in the 2016 cycle with the sort of alt-right movement, which was an American product that was exported, and it turned the so-called right a bit more clownish than it had been before. Of course, because it's a generational issue as well. But now the MAGA movement is just a complete disgrace and is best forgotten. And so hopefully European political movements have the good sense to disassociate from MAGA and Trump. And I think they have. At least that's the impression I've gotten so far, that not a whole lot of people in Europe, at least, outside of the sort of kosher mainstream right, no one is really enthusiastic about Donald Trump.
So I'll hand it over to Morgoth, because I know you've said some things about reform and versus restore, and how the situation on the British right. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, on the Saturday, when I think it was the Saturday when I woke up basically and the war started, the first thing I did was go on Twitter and say I strongly advise Restore to just take a neutral stance on this, because I was pretty certain that reform, as the kosher right, as Frodi says, would actually go all in on it, and they did, because they are much more MAGA aligned. And so, as it turned out, that was a correct call. And I mean, I'm not saying it was because of me or anything, but Restore actually did come out and say, yeah, we're just not in for this, whatever. We don't want foreign wars, and all of this kind of thing. So they checked out, which was wonderful to see, and the right call. And then it was like a week or two later, Reform had to do this humiliating U-turn, because they'd gone online with it. And then when they saw where it was going, obviously Keir Starmer said, we're not getting involved. And the general consensus was that this was crazy and we shouldn't be anywhere near it. And I think this is the problem, that the sort of MAGA aligned, I saw today, for example, that I always feel that she's this kind of tragic figure, this Liz Truss woman. And she's typical of like a MAGA aligned right wing. and she said she's launching this British CPAC thing. And as soon as I see like something like PAC, that's just America. Whenever I see a PAC, I just think this is the Americanization of British politics. And in this context, it's shackled to MAGA, which in my view is like is just like the Titanic sinking. I mean, so I definitely think for people who are interested on the right across Europe, obviously I include Britain in that, is that you were definitely in this sort of move the ships away from the Death Star moment, because that thing's going to blow. I mean, it's kinetic, like literally the case. But on the sort of the situation as well, where I remember during the election cycle, and I didn't really have much to say. I tend not to comment on American domestic issues, but because of the sort of the network I'm in, I knew people who had gone all in on Trump again, but you always had this fault line where it was people who signed up for the full MAGA package, which baked into that was no more forever wars in the Middle East. There's no getting around that. It was, even if they are trying to sort of wriggle out of that, peace through strength. I mean, but there was an uneasy alliance, and there was this constant tension where you had the neoconservative types trying to drag the movement in one direction, and then the more sort of Midwest, traditional Americans, heritage Americans, as they'd say, trying to drag it in the other direction. And they were much more, they wanted the left to be destroyed, actually put in jail, persecuted, shut down, all of the woke stuff shut down, the border shut down. And then if they were lucky, they could have a look at the Civil Rights Act, and they could begin looking at birthright citizenship and all of these different things. All of that was internal. And there was the kind of people the neocons, who didn't really care about that. And when we get to where we are now, you can say, well, so there was these two different factions. Which one ultimately prevailed? And in fact, you could make the argument, given that we know now that the war party prevailed, you could make the argument that what they did get, which was shutting the border, putting the woke away and whatever, was all just paying lip service to that particular part of the party in order to get the war. In other words, it's not so much like, well, they got all these goodies, and unfortunately there was also a forever war. It's like, well, you got those goodies, whatever you did get, because the forever war was being planned, and they just wanted to string you along for a bit. I mean, that's a very cynical way of looking at it, but ultimately it's probably kind of true. And the amount of social, like political capital that they're going to spend on this war, imagine what they could have got done. All of the stuff about the Civil Rights Act and sorting out America internally, it could have been sunk, like that energy could have been used in that direction. But in the end, it's gone to frantically deploying troops to the Strait of Hormuz and trying to get oil tankers through and dodging Iranian missiles. Like the betrayal is absolutely staggering, to be honest.
So yeah, I'll read a few more super chats because they're kind of related to this topic. So one of them says, these are both by a disembodied voice. It says, the left and the Dems would struggle to sell war on Iran to their base, but we should be wary of supporting the Dems. We need to look at the big picture. It's a double whammy. The Republicans are the war Jews and the Dems are the gay Jews. It's a long-term Jew op. What kind of what Morgoth said, that it was almost like they were like giving them kind of this red meat to the base to gin them up into this kind of jingoistic fervor so that they could sell the war with the war with Iran. There's another question which is kind of similar. It says, if there is a mass draft like Vietnam, will the Zoomers come back totally radicalized like the Frade Corps and set up a national socialist state? Imagine losing your leg and coming back to a radical gynocracy full of brown people, would they snap? Well, I mean, I'm always against this idea that, like, you just need to make people mad enough and then they're just going to bring about a political solution overnight. I don't think it's going to work like that. But in terms of the question, did a lot of the stuff which MAGA did, which might have actually been positive, was it all designed to gin up the base and get them behind a war? I mean, I don't know if I would go that far. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that, because I would imagine that some people within the American government genuinely think that there's a problem with mass immigration. However, it seems like the Zionist element of MAGA was able to wrestle control away from the more populist and nationalistic element, the one that Morgoth mentions, with people like in the Midwest who their main focus is internal American politics. The thing which MAGA was originally supposed to be about. Another super chat I have here, it says, Endeavor wrote a countercurrents article about conspiracy theories recently. Doesn't the way that this war happened prove a giant conspiracy? Organizing this must have taken months and would have involved thousands of people, soldiers, politicians, and logistics, and yet it was a surprise to us. Well, I mean, if in the article, I actually am pretty clear that I do believe that in the Jewish question, and I've talked extensively about the Zionist lobby in the article, so it's not a contradiction of anything I had to say. But one thing I will say is that I think that both this war and the past couple of years, I think what it reveals is that the Zionist lobby is actually not all powerful as maybe they once were, but their power really is waning because they seem to be desperate to get this war done because they know that the writing's kind of on the wall. So I would caution people against making a god out of your enemies, because it seems like they're on the decline. But leading into the next thing, which I wanted to bring up, that doesn't necessarily mean that'll be good for us, because a few of the things I've seen over the past week or so. So the leftist Spanish government refused to grant the United States access to the military bases in Spain or something along those lines. So because they're opposed to the war in Iran. And this same leftist Spanish government amnestied hundreds of thousands of migrants in Spain just a few weeks ago. And now Iran has granted this government the right to go through the Strait of Hormuz. So Spanish ships are allowed to go through the Strait of Hormuz, whereas American and Israeli ships are blocked. Another thing which is kind of similar, it was actually today on X, there was this clip going around of the premier of Manitoba. He's like part of the leftist NDP party in Canada. The premier of Manitoba, he's an Indigenous Canadian guy. So I mean, and he's obviously very left wing, so very very anti-white. So he's no friend of mine. But his quote that he came out with, what he said was that no Canadians should be forced to die in a war for Iran, but to go further, no Americans from the blue collar or the middle class should be forced to die in this war. And what he said was, let the Epstein class fight the Epstein wars. And I struggle to find anything with that quote which I disagree about. I think that he hit the nail on the head with that one. But the problem is that I'm certain that I disagree with this guy on probably every other political issue. And that leads into the problem that the winners of this politically in the West are going to be the left, because, well, one is that Zionist power has come under heavy scrutiny, both from the right and the left, but especially from the left, in that it's basically supporting Israel isn't just a non-starter. It's just a toxic property on the left now, and it's even becoming the case in the Democratic Party. The seat of Zionist power in the United States, the Democratic Party even is starting to pretty much openly oppose the state of Israel. And it leaves us in this very difficult situation that all of these parties who, we've spent years criticizing for mass immigration, for the anti-white policies, for all the LGBT stuff, they're going to be handed a huge amount of political capital because they're going to be seen as the ones who are opposing this. And to contrast, there's something else I saw a couple of days ago from the right, which, I mean, it's a horrible thing to see. It's really disappointing. So they had this CPAC conference in Hungary, kind of like Morgoth mentioned earlier, that when Liz Truss wanted a PAC conference, it's an American import. And at this CPAC conference in Hungary, so this stands for Conservative Political Action Conference, I guess it wouldn't be CPAC conference because conference, but whatever. They played the U.S. national anthem. They were handing out MAGA hats. I think Dinesh D'Souza was there. And they had invited Benjamin Netanyahu as the guest of honor. This is an American import. This is just American conservatism as a carbon copy being put into Hungary. And apparently this was supposed to be this big conference for the right in Europe. And I feel like this is buying a ticket on the Titanic while the ship is already halfway underwater, because when you consider that Trump has reneged on Ukraine, leaving Europe to fit the bill, called Europe warmongers and cowardly and weak, and threatened to invade Greenland and Canada. He has hit Europe and Canada with these arbitrary tariffs and now started this extremely unpopular war, which is now going to greatly increase gas prices and cause economic turmoil in Europe and Canada, even though our countries have no involvement in the war, had no part in starting it. Like, nailing your colors to the mast of MAGA at this point, it is just political suicide. It is a toxic property. And unless there is this de-MAGAization of the right in Europe and Canada especially, but probably in the United States as well, that's going to be necessary. Unless that happens, the right's just going to be swept off the board, and we're going to be sent back to square one where the liberal establishment have just absolute political power. I really hope that we're able to avoid that. But the fact that so much of the right in the West has just been tied to the figure of Donald Trump for the past decade, it's going to be an uphill battle. Do any of you guys want to add something?
Yeah. Like, the unfortunate reality, I think, is that while MAGA has been in power, not really anything of substance has changed in the United States. I think immigration more or less has continued. I mean, now we have a Muslim mayor of New York City who put a transsexual man in charge of some new LGBT blah, 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 blah party mayoral department. All kinds of things are happening still. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, when the next presidential election comes around, the quote unquote right is going to get steamrolled. And, it's just the demographic change in the US has probably ironically led to a lot of the quote unquote anti-Semitism. And, basically, you're just like the left's going to dominate. And unfortunately, I'm that's what I wanted to say. One of the unfortunate results of this whole Zionist Iran war debacle and everything going on in Gaza and whatnot, I think will be, especially when the left takes back, power, will be this further demonization of quote unquote ethno-nationalism, because like that's the main, everybody's talked about this, I think, in our spheres, but I'll just repeat it. The main driving force with the anti-Zionism right now and the anti-war effort and just the general problems people have with, over-representation of Jews in power and whatnot, it just has to do with this, anti-colonialist mentality from the post-war era. Israel and Jews are seen as white people who are colonizing brown people and punishing them, oppressing them. And I kind of suspect that this will all we'll get an even it'll be an even bigger negative net loss for the quote unquote ethno-nationalist movement in the United States, to the extent that such a thing exists. Because everybody will just associate that with what happened in Israel and Gaza and the Iran war and all of that. I mean, if you look at the loudest figures in the United States, some of the loudest talking heads right now, Anna Kasparian has been gaining a lot of clout, and a lot of guys in our sphere are retweeting her and whatnot. And it's a lot of the stuff she says is she's right, but she's not on our side, and she's not advocating for our interests. And she's not going to. And a lot of the people she represents and gives a voice to, they don't represent our interests either, and they're not interested in supporting us. And in fact, when it comes time to, they'll probably demolish us. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
So do either Frodi or Morgoth have anything? What would you, to add to that? What would be the way forward? How can the right disassociate itself from Donald Trump in a way that we actually can maintain some face after this disaster?
Well, I think Well, I disassociated myself, or I'm just took a clear stand against Donald Trump and the MAGA movement leading up to his whole election campaign, and I advised all the people who follow me to do the same. So some people have been doing that, and it seems like even now there are some signs that the rats are abandoning the ship. Even I saw this morning, I saw this clip with an interview with Tucker Carlson on The Economist. And I mean, he's been criticizing a lot of what Israel has been doing, and he's had sort of taken a stand against some things that Trump has done. But it just gave me the vibe. It just felt like the vibe of the whole interview was that he wanted to distance himself from that, and he had a very sort of um, reconciling, conciliatory tone with the Economist interviewer, and she was kind of like a mom scolding him, like, what have you been doing? What is all this? And he's sort of like explaining himself, and he says in that interview, or in that clip, I haven't seen the whole interview, I just saw a few minutes of it, but he said that an America First movement has to be rooted in an absolute sort of alliance with Europe. And she was pushing back against that a little bit, saying, well, I mean, you've been criticizing Europe for taking a security threat from Russia seriously, and you've been sort of, I mean, he's been um, in a propaganda sense supporting Russia's war. And so it's like contradicting himself there, and saying that, well, the US should actually treat Europe as a serious ally. And so it feels like there's a shift there. And also the sort of the midwit whisperer, Joe Rogan, he was a cautiously pro MAGA a few months ago, or during at least the election. And now he's very critical and calls them idiots and so on. I think a lot of the people who have been associated with Trump are distancing themselves. And I think that is sort of a sign that things are not going very well. They sort of understand which way the wind is blowing. And so that is not going to be very fashionable going forward. I think in Europe it's slightly different. It's more difficult for Americans, because a lot of Americans are stuck in this mindset of, well, you have to choose, either it's the Democrats or it's Donald Trump, and that's not really true. It's sort of like the whole system is fake. So, um, at least intelligent people, that people in the mainstream might not understand how politics works, but at least intelligent people should understand that whole dichotomy is just fake. It's just you absolutely do not have to choose between those two options. You have other options as well. And so hopefully people will at least start to abandon that sort of illusion that you're going to vote for this Caligula figure and he's going to set things right.
Do you have anything to add to that, Morgoth?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons why I think things in Britain are, for once, less bleak is just the general political setup. So one of the things that we've got, of course, is that the Tories are kind of like a spent force, and we had the Boris wave. So with the so-called right-wing party, we got the Boris wave, the most sort of insane left-wing mumbo jumbo. Again, it was another betrayal of like showmen and bullshit artists. And so we got all of the kind of the negatives domestically because of the Tories, but it's also clear that they would have also been in on the war. They were also sort of supportive of the war in the first week or so. And then you get the reform, which is similar. They're going down the same path. And the reason why I mention this is because Labour, not only have they opposed the war, now there's reasons to do that because of who votes for Labour, but also the immigration. They're bringing the immigration right down from the Tory highs. And so on both sides of that, it's better outcome than what you'd get with the right-wing slop parties in Britain. And as for the sort of Restore, what's so good about this, and why I was so like on tenterhooks when the war started, and I was like, please don't sign up to this, please don't sign up for this, and they didn't. And why it stands out and the contrast with MAGA is really stark, because if you remember Rupert Lowe standing in a kind of grey on his farm, and the weather was grey and it looked bleak and it was cold, and he had his barber on, and his message was, I'm not promising you a good time. What we need to do to fix this country is going to be extraordinarily painful. Like this is as far away from Trumpian rhetoric as you get. You've got this toned down, kind of somber, like kind of old man, who's still got a spring in his step, and there's no fireworks, there's no wrestling sort of stadiums and all those pyrotechnics, and you're not getting rappers twerking on the stage. It's just this man on his farm in a grey day saying, all I can promise you is sort of blood, sweat, and tears. But that's what has to be done. And so in that sense, in terms of having a right-wing party, which is sort of the antithesis to MAGA, Restore is sort of doing a good job of that. A kind of post-MAGA, almost post-populist party, where the people around Rupert Lowe come across as quite bookish. They're very young, they're very well read, they're very slick. And in that way, on a very rare occasion, we can say, if they carry on like this, and if they carry on doing good stuff, we might be in a better position to sort of orientate ourselves in this post-MAGA world by having something which is more rooted, more grounded, more subdued, and more serious.
Yeah, I actually made that
interject?
point. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add on to Morgoth's point. I agree with everything he said. And what I like about Rupert Lowe is, let me see, what was the exact quote he said? What is necessary will be incredibly painful. I think saying something like that, unlike MAGA, is going to attract the right people, the people who have more of a generational mindset, people who are in it for the long haul. Whereas the kind of antics and things that MAGA attracted was just all short-term, low deferral, like no deferral of gratification type people. And so Rupert, now I don't know if Restore will be successful or not, but I think he's certainly setting a tone to attract the right type of people, get the right type of people who are involved to be involved, and build a good foundation that can last a lot longer than something like, MAGA, which, as everybody kind of pointed out, it's fireworks and clownish carny antics and whatnot. So yeah.
If I could just say it quickly as well, that I think, it just come to my mind, and I thought I'd get it out there. I remember when I did an article on the Substack when this was announced, and I put the clipping from Shackleton when he went to the South Pole, and there's that famous advert where it's like, men wanted for dangerous mission with low wages, chance of freezing to death, nights of bitter long cold, chances of survival like very little, and if you're successful, you'll be a hero. This whole thing, and with the sort of the pitch of Rupert Lowe, it's more speaking to, you have a duty to step up and kind of sacrifice and brace yourself, because this is going to be tough. Whereas if you look at the main messaging of MAGA, it's sit back and enjoy the show. It's be passive and watch Trump's one-liners and put-downs and dancing around, that little dance that he does, and all of it speaks to there's no such thing as duty. There's no such thing as struggle. There's just enjoy the show. And that's a key distinction. And I think the reason why I bring this up, I think if we are going to move towards the post-MAGA right, that's what it has to be rooted in, rather than the big wrestling Jerry Springer thing.
Yeah, that's I totally agree with that. I had made the point on Twitter that I said that what I liked about Rupert Lowe's the announcement video was just that it wasn't it had no confetti and no parades and wrestlers and WWE. It was just a man saying what needed to be said on his farm, and he actually liked the post. So hopefully, hopefully that's in line with what he's going for. What I wanted to say was that I think that the lesson that we will be able to derive from MAGA, now it's a bit early, so it's not, they're still in power. I kind of view them though at this point. I kind of view MAGA at this point as some kind of like neocon populist Paris commune. So, it's just they've gotten these kind of crazy, incompetent crowd has somehow gotten their hands onto political power, and then they're doing all this insane stuff just as their enemies are surrounding them, and as it's just a matter of time before they roll in and crush them. I kind of view it as that now. But I think that the main takeaway will be that when you get political power, you actually have to govern. I think back to that first announcement, those first announcements Trump made just after he won the election, before he had been sworn in, where he said, the Gulf of Mexico, it's going to be the Gulf of America. We're going to make Canada the 51st state. We're going to invade Greenland. And you'll get all these maps where these magatards on Twitter are sharing this a picture of the Western Hemisphere. The entire Western Hemisphere has been invaded by the United States, and it's all just a LARP. But it's also just extremely unserious because it's not actually taking on the real issues. Like you look at American cities, they're not these ideal places. The last thing that the United States needs to do right now is to go on these imperial adventures, because as you see what's going on with Iran is that it's been a disaster. The problem with the MAGA influencer and the social media echo chamber is that it seems like it didn't incentivize any self-criticism. So it only incentivized just getting on board and cheering Trump on and rah and look at his dance, look at him own these woke politicians in the EU or something like that. And it just turned into this big clown show, and they really just weren't actually serious about governing. And I don't know whether this war with Iran was inevitable. You could make the argument that as soon as Trump got in, it was just going to happen. When you look down the board with people like Huckabee and Hegseth and people like Witkoff and Kushner, maybe it was inevitable. But I think that part of the problem, if it would have been preventable, would have been actually self-criticism. It would have been actually, when Trump does something good, maybe you can say that this is some good policy, maybe like shutting down the border, for example. But when they do something bad, it seems like the reaction I always got whenever I criticized something that Trump did. Now, I'm not American, so it's coming from an outsider perspective. It was always that, well, what about the deportations? Well, Canada doesn't have deportations, and I've even gotten messages from Canadians saying that, or responses rather, saying, well, Trump's doing deportations. What do you mean you don't want to be the 51st state? You're saying you want more mass immigration? And it just seems like that the mood was just, you're not supposed to have any criticism at all, because then that would knock the MAGA influencer and the social media echo chamber. It would knock them down from their jingoistic high. And that's what I think a lot of the things like the take over Greenland, Canada, 51st state, I really think that it was just meant to make the magatards on Twitter feel good about themselves. And I don't know whether they could have prevented the war, but maybe if MAGA weren't just this echo chamber that was just Trump's cult of personality, and you weren't supposed to just cheer on everything he did and then sane wash the insane, maybe it would have been preventable, but I don't know. But I think, though, that in the future, if right-wing parties get into power, they actually have to be a lot more serious about governing, and not so much about having some kind of social media clown show that just makes them feel good about themselves, because it's about, like, politics is not supposed to be entertainment, and MAGA was largely just entertainment.
Yeah, when Trump took office, or maybe even before he took office, after he won the election, I made a post, or I made the comment that, during the election campaign, I could understand, or I could tolerate Trump thinking that it's his job to just appeal to the monster truck fans. But after you won the election, it's your job to represent your country on the global stage. And he failed to do that. He just continued to appeal to the monster truck fans and didn't. It was just a very self-indulgent way of governing, and he just used it as his own playground, and he didn't take the job seriously. And he even said, I mean, we mentioned the meeting with Trump and Vance and Zelensky in the White House, which the whole world thought was a disaster. But Trump said afterwards, well, it was good for the TV ratings. And that's how he has seen his presidency, that if he does something insane and crazy, well, at least he gets a lot of attention to himself. And that's probably not a wise way to govern a superpower. And so I think if there's one positive thing that has come out of Trump and MAGA, it's that he has completely discredited the whole Jerry Springer style of being a leader. I think people are just sick and tired of it now. He's like the whole. I think people are just burnt out from having to deal with all that insanity. It's not even funny. It's not entertaining anymore. It's just boring, and it's just old. It's just the sort of tired nihilism. It's not. He's not funny anymore. The whole joke is over. It's old now, and I think and I hope that that will be his legacy. That he's so discredited the sort of carny style of being a politician that the next generation will see it as toxic and will not want anything to do with it.
I mean, just today, he said he had this interview or press conference, and he said, "Oh, well, we're going to retake the Strait of Trump. Oh, I mean, the Strait of Hormuz." And I mean, it's just pathetic when America is bogged down in this kind of military conflict and potentially going to be sending in thousands of troops who could be, many of whom may not come back. You know, they could be looking at hundreds, maybe even thousands of casualties in the next couple of weeks. The fact that he's not taking that seriously, it just really speaks badly to this kind of style of governance. Did you want to add something, Will?
I was just going to say that when I was back in the U.S., I was working retail and sort of at a business that, let's just say, it catered largely to construction contractors. And the sense I got from a lot of people was that they thought Trump was a clown. And this wasn't like all leftists. That these were like a lot of rural people, that worked, trades jobs and whatnot. And I was kind of taken back by that. That was I guess a bit of I don't want to call that a wake up call, but I guess it was part of my overall wake up call on the general state of affairs in the U.S. But yeah. So I'm just bringing that up in response to what Frodi said. I think obviously there still is like a significant MAGA subset of people in the U.S. and around the world at this point, but I do see this element of fatigue setting in, and I just wanted to bring up that experience to bolster that point.
I was watching the John Mearsheimer stream last week, and he was talking about a book that he wrote about why politicians. Like, it's about politicians and lying. I haven't read the book, but he was talking about it, and with Trump in mind. And he was saying, like, the best thing for a politician is not to lie, because their word will carry more. I mean, an example of this is where the Iranians are coming out and they are saying, okay, we are now going to hit this or that target, and they will hit it. They're not lying. They're not bluffing. They'll just go ahead and do it. And of course, what Mearsheimer was saying, so if you actually are trusted as a politician, it's the best case scenario. That's the best. But the other step is that if you lie, so if you don't lie at all, it's the best place to be in. But if you lie sometimes, you can actually make bank on that because people will not know they're being lied to. But the third option is that if you are known to be a liar and you lie all of the time, like Trump does now, then you just get tuned out as a kind of background noise, and nobody really cares anymore what you're going to say or what you do say. It just becomes waffle. And you can see this, like this has actually happened with Trump now, and in ways which will be real, because people are so used to that little game of like saying something bold on a Friday night and then chickening out on the Monday, or just lies in general, that it used to be the case that people on the stock markets and investments and all of this, they would kind of pay close attention to what he said because they had millions of dollars on the line. And you can see that the line on the graph goes up and down and up and down in accordance with that on all these different issues. But what's begun happening more recently is that the line kind of just stays the same. Where it's like, well, it's probably just bullshit anyway, so we'll just kind of phase that out of the equation. And I think this is the same for everybody. I like those truth social posts or a video of Trump prattling on. I just don't watch it anymore. I don't care because I know that it's just going to be nonsense. And I think this is a terrible situation to be in. For this is the president of America, and it's just like, yeah, it's just all bullshit. It's just all noise. None of it matters. And a lot of the sort of the geopolitical YouTube channels, they've also factored this in, where it's like, just don't, when you hear talk about negotiations or we're going to strike a deal, just don't pay any attention to it. Look at where troops are being sent. Look at where airplanes are being stationed or which aircraft carriers are moving where and all of this kind of thing. Because what you're going to see in the real world, what's actually happening in the real world is the tell, not the hot air coming out of Trump's mouth. And you just think, what a fall from grace that is. Like where he is just this babbling clown that nobody even laughs at the jokes anymore. Nobody cares what he has to say. It's this kind of grand tragedy that we're now seeing come to its fruition. And you think, if you go back all the way to, I mean, I was busy sort of putting together, writing an essay on this, where if you go back to sort of when he came down the golden escalator and all of the high hopes and all of that in 2015, and you just think to yourself, like, how was this all predetermined? How would this end? Was there a timeline in which Trump just kind of shuffled off to play golf and see out his days quietly, or was it always baked in that there would have to be this? You know, we talk about how it's like a television show; it's just pure entertainment. Are we now in the kind of grand finale? Is this when like Daenerys burns King's Land to the ground, or some whatever it is, or when Tony Soprano's in the restaurant at the end and he's about to get shot? And like, is it like, because it was all just entertainment? Are we now in the big sort of end saga, the big explosions at the end? Is this it for Trump and MAGA? And it's kind of strange to think about it like that we're now deep into the third act, and you can think, yeah, it was always going to end in mayhem, bloodshed, and chaos.
Well, we're almost at the 2-hour mark, so if anyone else has any more points before we finish, I'll pass it over to you, and we'll finish in a couple of minutes. Does anyone have anything left to say?
I'll just say that some of the real world consequences of this could be like we've never seen before. I've been paying attention to the fertilizer situation. I know it's kind of mundane. You get into the mundane sort of supply chain logistics, but just I got it up here. There's I just Googled this but I've been looking into this carefully, and it says, as of late March 2026, the war in Iran has severely disrupted global fertilizer supplies, with roughly 1/3, 30 to 33% of the world's seaborne fertilizer trade being halted or delayed due to the near total shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. And yeah, it's nitrogen-based fertilizers. Now, the problem here is a lot of it's planting season for farmers, and you get into these ugly scenarios that can play out. Now, I think farmers actually had, I think farmers would have already had fertilizer in for this year. I don't believe they're buying the fertilizer in just a week or two before planting. So I think the fertilizer was already in their barns and whatnot. But this raises an ugly problem for Europe because a lot of the fertilizer actually goes to North Africa and Africa for their crops. And if they're facing famine, they're all going to come north. And so you see there's these kind of second, third order effects that could be really, really horrifying. And this is not even to mention the economic collapse and all of that. And they're playing with the point that I'm trying to make here is that they're really playing, they're really damaging what keeps the modern world propped up with this stuff. It's very serious.
Yeah, and the one thing that is a bit depressing when you think of it is that Trump's only about just over a quarter through his term, and man, if this goes on for another 3 years, I mean, God help us. But I mean, I don't know. I'm wondering if by the time the midterms come around in the United States, will there be an effort made to actually just remove Trump from office? And honestly, at this point, would a lot of the Republicans just support that? I don't know.
In terms of like closing thoughts, I just wanted to add that like I think a lot of people are potentially, in our spheres are potentially excited that this disproportionate Jewish control over various facets of U.S. Foreign and domestic policy and whatnot, it's coming to a head, and maybe on the horizon there's this hope of a post-Jewish century, like a post-era, an era that wherein Jews don't exercise this disproportionate outweighed control over the U.S. And I think something we've been implying throughout this discussion is that that might not necessarily, like a post-Jewish era for the United States might not equate to a resolution of all our problems. Like a lot of people, a fair amount of people in these spheres think that's going to be the case. Oh, if you just take care of the JQ, everything will solve itself. But I just kind of wanted to read out a quote that I've been reading a lot lately to various people. And it's from a mid-20th century Romanian nationalist, Corneliu Codreanu. He says, quote, "A country has the Jews it deserves, just as mosquitoes can thrive and settle in swamps. Likewise, the former can only thrive in the swamps of our sins," unquote. And, I think that just, if it's not the Jews, it'll be somebody else, because the reason why you get figures like Trump, you get crazy Zionists like Lindsey Graham and so on and so forth, I think is because, generally speaking, the white population is a bunch of, I hate saying this because it sounds so like self-loathing and derogatory toward, my own countrymen. But I think culturally speaking, we're largely a bunch of minor merchants with this mercenary mentality, like looking for the best deal. And when you have concentrated special interest groups, often, tribalist groups, they kind of have this huge population from which they can select various hyper white individualist actors who will do their bidding. So I just kind of think that those mechanics are going to continue to play out regardless of whether or not, the ADL is a thing or APAC is a thing.
Well, I think what would happen is that it would be replaced by just third worldism, that it would just be all these migrant groups trying to loot the system for their own benefit. So, I mean, that's one thing I've also pointed out is that I do believe that the Zionist lobby's power is waning, but one of the problems is that a lot of other foreign ethnic lobbies, for example, Indians, Chinese, and various other migrant groups, now they're also grappling for political power. So it doesn't actually solve the problem. So it's like just out with one problem and in with another one. But anyway, I think in the terms of that, because that's a discussion for an entire another time. But there's a lot to say about that too. But I think we've run out of time for this stream, so I think we'll call it a stream here. So thanks for coming on, guys. It's been a great discussion, and I hope to do it again sometime.